Once upon a time in England, long, long ago, there was a king named Henry VII. Born in 1457, Henry belonged to the Lancaster family, a powerful group who proudly wore red roses as their symbol. They were rivals with the Woodville family, who were known for their white roses. These two families were not the best of friends. In a big battle, Henry VII showed great bravery. He defeated the mighty King Richard III and became the King of England. Now crowned, Henry wanted peace. He married Elizabeth of York, a lovely lady with golden hair from the rival family with the white roses. This marriage was special because it united the two roses, the red and the white, into one new emblem called the Tudor rose. The Tudor family became very famous. Henry VII and Elizabeth had 4 children: Margaret, Mary, Arthur, and another son named Henry. Little did anyone know, these children would grow up to have exciting futures themselves. King Henry VII was a kind father, especially towards his son, Prince Arthur. Prince Arthur married a Spanish princess named Catherine of Aragon, who also had golden hair. Sadly, Prince Arthur died young, leaving his family very sad, especially his father, King Henry VII. Though heartbroken, King Henry VII's other son, Henry, became the focus of his attention. The love and care from his mother, Elizabeth, and sisters surrounded him. But tragedy struck again in 1503 when Elizabeth of York passed away, making young Henry and his family very sad. After King Henry VII passed away in 1509, his son Henry became King Henry VIII. He inherited the throne of England and married the same Catherine of Aragon, who was once his brother Arthur's wife. These stories of kings and queens are full of love, bravery, and sometimes sadness. But they remind us of how the Tudor family, with their special blended rose, came to rule England, telling a tale of unity and peace. Once upon a time in England, Elizabeth of York, with her striking red gold hair and light orange gable hood, was born in 1466. She was part of the Woodville family, also known as the supporters of the White Rose. But there was a family feud, as their rivals, the Lancasters, supported the Red Rose. Elizabeth's mother, Elizabeth Woodville, didn't like the Lancasters at all. Elizabeth's uncle, King Richard III, tried to fight Henry from the Lancaster side, but he lost. Eventually, Henry won the battle, and he and Elizabeth of York fell in love. They got married and had 4 children together: Marguerite Tudor, Mary Rose Tudor, Prince Arthur, and Henry Tudor. Prince Arthur married a lady named Catherine of Aragon, who had beautiful red golden hair and a golden gable hood just like Elizabeth once wore. Sadly, Arthur died young, leaving poor Catherine behind. Even though her son Prince Arthur was gone, Elizabeth of York was a loving mother to Henry Tudor. Henry loved his mom very much. Unfortunately, Elizabeth of York passed away in 1503, leaving Henry heartbroken. When King Henry VII died in 1509, his son, Henry VIII, became the new king. He married Catherine of Aragon, just like his brother Arthur had. But as Henry VIII grew up, he became quite a strict ruler. So, while Elizabeth of York's story is full of love and family, it also weaves through battles, losses, and kingdoms altogether. She played an important role in this chapter of England's history, and her legacy lived on through her children and her story. Once upon a time in the Grand Kingdom of England, there lived a king named Henry VIII. He was a tall, strong ruler with big dreams for his kingdom. In the year 1509, King Henry married a lovely Spanish princess named Catherine of Aragon. Catherine was gracefully beautiful, with red gold hair that shined like the sun, and she wore a golden gable hood that crowned her head like a queen. For several years, King Henry and Queen Catherine ruled together, but in 1516, everything began to change. That year, Queen Catherine gave birth to a baby girl named Mary. King Henry was disappointed because he had hoped for a baby boy who would one day take his place as king. Meanwhile, King Henry found himself falling in love with a lady named Anne Boleyn, who had brown hair and wore a charming red French hood. Even though he loved Anne, King Henry couldn't marry her because he was still married to Queen Catherine. Determined, King Henry asked the Pope, who was the leader of the Catholic Church, for a divorce. However, the Pope said no, which made King Henry very mad. Feeling frustrated, King Henry decided to make a big change. He broke away from the Catholic Church and formed his own church, where he could make the rules. In 1533, King Henry finally divorced Queen Catherine and married Anne Boleyn. Queen Catherine was heartbroken as she loved the king dearly. She found solace by spending her days praying and helping others like a nun. After a few years, sadly, Queen Catherine grew very sick and passed away from an illness. She left behind her beloved daughter, Mary Tudor, who missed her mother greatly. As life moved on, things also changed for Anne Boleyn. Though she tried to be a good queen, in 1536, she faced her own sad fate. Anne Boleyn was accused of treason, which means being disloyal to the king, and was executed at the Tower of London. This is the tale of Catherine of Aragon, a queen who was loved by her people and cherished her daughter, Princess Mary. It's a story of love, change, and the strong bonds between a mother and her child. Once upon a time, in the early 1500s, there lived a beautiful lady named Anne Boleyn, and was known for her striking brown hair, which she often wore with a black and yellow French hood, and a black veil flowing gracefully down her back. She was born in the year 1501. Anne's journey began when she traveled to the UK in 1522, where she captured the attention of King Henry VIII. The moment King Henry set his eyes on Anne, he was smitten. He loved her so much that he wanted to marry her, but there was one big problem. King Henry was already married to Queen Catherine. In those days, only the Pope could say if a king's marriage could be ended, and the Pope said no to King Henry's request to divorce Catherine. But King Henry was so determined to marry, and that he made a very big decision. In 1533, he broke away from the entire Catholic Church. This was a huge deal back then and changed England forever. After breaking with the church, King Henry divorced Catherine and married Anne Boleyn. Everyone hoped Anne would give birth to a boy, an heir to the throne, but she gave birth to a beautiful baby girl named Elizabeth instead. King Henry was not pleased and began to look at other women, like Jane Seymour, who had blonde hair and a light orange gable hood. Anne noticed King Henry's wandering eyes and became very jealous. She tried to make him jealous too, by flirting with other men. When King Henry found out, he was furious. He lost his temper, yelling and shouting at Anne. In a moment of anger, King Henry decided that Anne must be punished severely. He ordered that Anne should be locked in the dungeons. Then, in 1536, Anne faced a very sad ending. She was taken to the execution site, where she bravely kneeled down and prayed. The swordsman then swung his sword, and Anne Boleyn was executed. Not long after, King Henry married Jane Seymour, and as for the little girl Anne left behind, she grew up to be Queen Elizabeth I, one of the greatest queens England has ever known. This is the tragic story of Anne Boleyn, full of love, betrayal, and historical change. Once upon a time, in a very big and fancy castle, there lived a lady named Jane Seymour. She had pretty blonde hair and liked wearing a special hat called a gable hood, which was yellow and light orange. Jane was born in 1508, a long, long time ago. Growing up, Jane was known for being kind and gentle. One day, she met a king named Henry VIII. King Henry was very important and very famous, and he had fallen madly in love with Jane. But there was a tiny problem. You see, Jane worked for another queen named Anne Boleyn. Now, Anne Boleyn had short brown hair and wore a different type of hat called a French hood, with a black and yellow color and a long black veil at the back. Anne was quite nice to everyone, especially people who were not so wealthy. But despite Anne's kindness, her life took a sad turn. In 1536, Anne Boleyn faced a terrible fate. She was executed, which means she was put to death by the king's orders. King Henry didn't seem to mind because he quickly set his sights on marrying Jane Seymour. So, King Henry and Jane Seymour got married, and in 1537, Jane was going to have a baby. But King Henry warned Jane to be careful because he remembered what had happened when Anne had a daughter before him. Jane was a little scared, but she bravely went on. Luckily, Jane Seymour gave birth to a healthy boy named Edward, who made King Henry very happy. However, a sad shadow fell over this joyful time because Jane became very sick after having Edward, and unfortunately, she died. King Henry was so sad about losing Jane that he decided she would always be his favorite wife. But life carried on, and he married again. When he married his fourth wife, Henry was not happy because he thought she was not as pretty as Jane. Legend has it that Jane Seymour's spirit felt sorry for the new queen. As a kind ghost, she comforted the fourth wife to stop her from feeling sad. And that is the story of Jane Seymour, a lady who is known for her kindness and adventures in the complex world of kings and queens. Once upon a time, in the 16th century, there was a lady named Anne of Cleves. She was born in 1515 into a powerful family in Germany, and had orange hair, and often wore a red headdress called a stickelchen, which looked like a square-shaped cap. Even though she came from a noble background, her education was not like others we know of today. Meanwhile, in England, King Henry VIII from the famous Tudor family was on the lookout for a new wife. He had already been married several times, as was the custom for kings to have heirs, and now he was searching for someone new. When King Henry met Anne for the first time, he was disappointed because he didn't find her as beautiful as he had hoped. Despite his initial feelings, in the year 1540, King Henry VIII married Anne of Cleves. Behind the scenes, the king's advisor, Thomas Cromwell, who had helped arrange the marriage, was blamed for its failure. Sadly, Cromwell was executed in the Tower of London. However, King Henry's heart soon wandered. He met a young lady named Catherine Howard, who had brown hair and wore a special French hood covered with a black veil. The king fell in love with Catherine and, ignoring his marriage to Anne, started spending much time with her, and was heartbroken to see this. One day, in a moment of anger and heartbreak, Anne of Cleves slapped King Henry. This was all Henry needed to decide that he wanted to divorce Anne. He went ahead and married Catherine Howard. Though Anne was left alone after the divorce, she was given a nice house to live in. Still, she felt sad and lonely about how things turned out. Her marriage had ended, and her dream of being queen had slipped away. On January 1st, 1541, Anne watched as Catherine Howard took her place as queen, feeling a mixture of emotions. Though her life didn't turn out as she planned, Anne of Cleves continued to live, seeking contentment in other things. This was the story of Anne of Cleves, a woman who was briefly a queen and who lived a quiet life after her time at the royal court ended. Once upon a time, in the United Kingdom, a little girl named Catherine Howard was born. She had brown hair and often wore a black and white French hood. Sadly, when Catherine was very young, she lost her mother and was taken care of by her loving grandmother, Agnes Howard. As she grew older, Catherine became a beautiful young lady. Her life took a big turn when she crossed paths with the mighty King Henry VIII, who was captivated by her charm. Henry fell head over heels and decided to marry Catherine. Before this, King Henry was married to Anne of Cleves, who had bright orange hair and wore a unique red headdress shaped like a squire's cap. and Catherine were friendly and was always nice to young Catherine. However, King Henry decided to divorce and marry Catherine instead. In 1541, a year after their marriage, Catherine made a grave mistake. She fell for another man, Thomas Cromwell, and had a secret relationship with him. When King Henry discovered this betrayal, he was heartbroken and angry. Catherine's actions led her to a dreadful fate. In 1542, she was imprisoned, and it was decided that she would be executed. Though Catherine was scared, she showed bravery at the end. Standing before a crowd, she thought of her cousin and Boleyn, who had faced a similar fate. With her last words, Catherine remained strong. She lay her head on the block as everyone watched in silence. The executioner lifted the big axe, and Catherine Howard was beheaded at the tender age of 18. Her story, like a cautionary tale, reminds us of the turbulent lives of those who lived in the court of King Henry VIII. Once upon a time, in the land of England, there was a lady named Catherine Parr. She had black short hair and always wore a white bonnet and coif, with a dark red dress. Catherine was a clever and kind woman. Catherine lived in a time when King Henry VIII ruled the kingdom. King Henry was known for having many wives, some of whom had very sad endings. Despite knowing about King Henry's past with his wives, one day, he met Catherine and fell in love. Henry wanted Catherine to be his new queen. Catherine was worried. She knew what happened to King Henry's other wives, and she was afraid of saying yes to him. But King Henry was determined, and in 1543, he married Catherine Parr. Catherine was a clever lady and knew how to make the best of her situation. She was very kind to Henry's daughters, Mary and Elizabeth. She taught them about many important things, like reading and history. She wanted them to learn and be strong like her. When Catherine looked out of the window, she often saw Mary, who had shiny red gold hair, playing with Elizabeth, who had bright orange hair. Catherine cared for them and tried to be a good stepmother, even though Henry didn't care much because the girls' mothers were no longer in his favor. In 1547, King Henry VIII passed away. While the rest of the kingdom was relieved from his rule, Catherine Parr survived and was happy to see a new beginning. People in England breathed a sigh of relief because they were free from the king's tough reign. Sadly, in 1548, just a year after King Henry's death, Catherine Parr passed away too. She left behind Mary Tudor and Elizabeth Tudor, two young girls who she had loved and educated. Her kindness and wisdom had a lasting impact on them. And that, my young friends, is the story of Catherine Parr, the last wife of Henry VIII, who brought a touch of kindness and wisdom to a time filled with worry and change. Once upon a time in a kingdom long ago, there was a handsome baby boy named Edward Tudor. He was born in 1537 to Jane Seymour, who was known for her beautiful blonde hair and wore a lovely yellow and light orange gable hood. Edward's father, King Henry VIII, was overjoyed to have a son, but sadly, Edward's mother, Jane, passed away shortly after his birth, leaving King Henry and little Edward behind. Edward Tudor grew up to be King Henry VIII's favorite child. While he adored his sisters, they weren't as cherished by their father. However, Edward didn't care about favoritism. He loved his sisters very much. In 1547, when Edward was just 9 years old, King Henry VIII died, and young Edward became king. King Edward VI was a kind-hearted boy who cared deeply for his people, especially the poor. He often shared bread with those in need, bringing happiness to their faces. Edward was also nice to Lady Jane Grey, a girl with striking dark brown hair and a dark red French hood. But darkness soon crept into young King Edward's life. He fell seriously ill, and despite the doctor's efforts, they couldn't save him. Edward died at the tender age of 15. This sudden loss left the kingdom mourning. After Edward's passing, Lady Jane Grey became queen for a brief time. Unfortunately, this didn't sit well with Mary Tudor, Edward's half-sister. Mary had golden red hair and sported a black French hood. She was very determined to rule and wasn't happy that Jane was queen. In 1554, Mary Tudor took drastic action against Lady Jane. Sadly, Lady Jane Grey was executed, marking a tragic end to a short reign. Mary then ascended to the throne herself. This story of Edward Tudor reminds us of the challenges and dramas of royal life, filled with joy, sadness, kindness, and betrayal. Though Edward's reign was brief, his kindness to his people is still remembered. Once upon a time, in the year 1516, a princess was born with red gold hair. Her name was Mary Tudor, and she was the daughter of King Henry VIII and Queen Catherine of Aragon. Catherine loved her little girl dearly, but King Henry VIII wanted a son. He desperately wished for a male heir to take over his crown someday. Unfortunately, the king blamed Queen Catherine for not giving him the son he wanted. So, in 1533, he made a very bold decision. King Henry divorced Queen Catherine and married Anne Boleyn, a lady with beautiful brown hair. Then, in 1536, something very sad happened. Catherine of Aragon passed away from an illness. Around the same time, Anne Boleyn was accused of crimes and lost her life as well. The years went by, and in 1547, King Henry VIII himself passed away. His young son, Edward, took the throne but died too. A lady named Jane Grey became queen afterwards, but she was queen for only a short time before losing her crown. Mary Tudor finally became queen. She wore magnificent dresses and adorned her hair with a black French hood. But Queen Mary was quite angry. She missed her mother's Catholic Church and wanted everyone to follow it again. Mary decided to be very harsh with people who didn't do what she wanted. Unfortunately, she became known as Bloody Mary because she punished her people harshly. Despite this, she had a sister, Elizabeth Tudor, who was very clever and brave, with striking orange hair. Queen Mary didn't trust her sister, Elizabeth. She was so worried that Elizabeth would try to take her throne that she locked her up in dungeons. The people became sad and frightened under Mary's rule. Then, in 1558, Queen Mary passed away. Elizabeth Tudor, Mary's sister, took her place. Elizabeth was a wise and caring queen and ruled for many years. This was the story of a queen named Mary Tudor, who was remembered for her rules and her red gold hair. In the bright year of 1533, a little girl named Elizabeth Tudor was born. Elizabeth had orange hair and was the daughter of King Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. Now, you'd think everyone would be happy about a new baby, but King Henry was disappointed. He wanted a boy to be a prince and future king, but he got a princess instead. Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth's mother, had beautiful brown hair and often wore a striking black and yellow French hood, a fancy hat with a veil flowing behind it. Despite the king's wishes, Anne loved her daughter dearly and played with her often. Unfortunately, dark days were ahead. In 1536, Anne Boleyn was executed and beheaded because people accused her of things that were not true. Elizabeth was still a small girl and didn't understand much about what had happened. Years passed, and in 1547, Elizabeth's father, King Henry VIII, also died. Elizabeth's half-brother, Edward Tudor, with his blonde hair, became king. Sadly, Edward didn't live long, and the throne passed to Lady Jane Grey for a very short time. But Lady Jane Grey wasn't queen for long either. She was executed and replaced by Mary Tudor. Mary Tudor, who had beautiful red gold hair, became queen next. She wore a black French hood and wasn't very kind to many of her people, earning her the nickname Bloody Mary. She ruled until her death in 1558. After that, it was Elizabeth's turn to become queen. Elizabeth was much beloved by her people. She was clever, kind to the poor, and defeated many of her nation's enemies. People called her Good Queen Bess and the Virgin Queen because she never married. Elizabeth never spoke much about her mother and Boleyn, but it is said that she always kept a piece of jewelry with her mother's face on it as a memory. Elizabeth reigned as a powerful and popular queen. Her time on the throne was known as the Elizabethan era, a time of great exploration and the flowering of English culture, including works by playwright William Shakespeare. Once upon a time in England, there was a royal family called the Tudors. It all began with Henry VII, who defeated King Richard III and brought peace to the land. This was known as the end of the Wars of the Roses, and to symbolize this union, they created the famous Tudor rose by joining the red and white roses. Henry VII married Elizabeth of York, and they had several children: Margaret, Mary, Arthur, and Henry. Life seemed good for the family, but when Prince Arthur, Henry VII's beloved son, sadly passed away, it was a tough time for them. Elizabeth died soon after, and in 1509, King Henry VII passed away too. His son Henry VIII then became king. King Henry VIII was famous for having 6 wives. First, he married Catherine of Aragon, who gave him a daughter named Mary, but their marriage ended in divorce. Then he married Boleyn, who famously wore a black and yellow French hood, and gave birth to Elizabeth, but was sadly beheaded. His third wife, Jane Seymour, did have a son, Edward, who became king after Henry VIII died in 1547. Unfortunately, Edward was very young and died soon after becoming king. After Edward's death, Jane Grey took the throne, but her reign was very short, lasting only 9 days before she was beheaded. Then came Mary Tudor, also known as Mary I, who attempted to turn England back to the old religious ways. Many remember her as an evil queen for her hard decisions. Finally, Elizabeth I, known for her red gold hair, came to the throne. She was a wonderful queen who earned the affection of her people. Elizabeth ruled wisely and powerfully, leading England to a golden age until her death in 1603. This was the incredible story of the Tudor family, filled with triumphs, challenges, and a legacy that influenced English history forever.